You don't remember when it started, but somewhere along the way, you began living for someone else. Maybe it was a parent who said, "Don't waste your time on that," or a teacher who smiled more when you stayed quiet. Maybe it was the look in their eyes, approval, that warm rush of "good job," of "I'm proud of you." You felt seen. You felt safe. But that moment planted a seed, a quiet rule you didn't question. If I act like they want, I'll be loved. You didn't notice yourself fading. You were too busy pleasing, too busy becoming what they needed you to be. They wanted you to be strong. You stopped crying. They wanted you to be smart. You stopped playing. They wanted you to be quiet. You swallowed your truth. Again and again, you chose their comfort over your authenticity. And no one noticed because you were so good at it. You became the peacekeeper, the achiever, the one who didn't make things difficult. But deep down, you knew something was missing. Not just joy, but you, the real you, the one who laughed too loud, who wanted more than safety, who dreamed wildly without limits, the one who once said, "I want to be an artist," but got told, "There's no future in that." And you believed it, because belief is easy when it protects you from rejection. So you buried the art, the voice, the mess, and you wore the mask. You wore it so long, you forgot it was a mask. You called it being responsible, being realistic, being mature. But inside you were shrinking, because every time you abandoned yourself, you sent a message to your soul: you don't matter. Every time you said yes, when you wanted to scream no, your body remembered. Your nervous system kept score. That tightness in your chest, that feeling of being drained, that endless overthinking, that wasn't random. That was your truth trying to speak, trying to breathe, beneath layers of performance. Because no matter how well you act, you can't trick your own soul. It knows what you really want. It knows who you really are. And it gets louder the longer you ignore it. That's why success doesn't feel good. That's why praise feels hollow. Because if it's not for you, it never fills you. You become a shell, full of achievements, empty of aliveness. Like Daniel, a 29-year-old lawyer, top of his class, nice apartment, good income, but each night he sits in silence, scrolling, drinking, numb. He tells himself he should be happy. His parents are proud. His LinkedIn looks great, but he hates law. He wanted to be a photographer, but his father once laughed and said, "Take photos on the weekend. That's not a job." So Daniel obeyed and slowly disappeared. Now, even in rooms full of people, he feels invisible because no one knows him, not even himself. This is the hidden cost of becoming who others want you to be. You lose your identity in exchange for acceptance. You trade your fire for someone else's comfort. But here's the truth: their love isn't real if it only exists when you perform. And your life isn't yours if you're living someone else's dream. You were not born to carry the unlived life of others. You were not born to be a mirror for their regrets. You were born to explore your own path, even if it makes others uncomfortable, even if it means losing approval. Because the price of not being true is losing yourself. And once that happens, no title or compliment can save you. The healing begins when you notice the mask. When you ask, "Whose life am I living?" When you admit, "I don't recognize myself anymore." That's not failure. That's awakening. The moment you see clearly how far you've drifted and choose, maybe for the first time, to come home to yourself. Even if it's messy, even if it's slow, even if it disappoints them, because you don't need their permission to be real. You only need the courage to stop performing and the softness to finally be who you are, not who they hoped you'd become. You were never meant to carry someone else's dream, but many of us do, not because we want to, but because we were trained to. Since childhood we were told, be a good boy, be a good girl. Don't make a scene. Don't talk back. Make your parents proud. Make your teachers proud. Make your culture proud. But at what cost? What happens when being good means abandoning yourself? What happens when you silence your truth just to be accepted? You don't just lose your voice, you lose your sense of self. And slowly, quietly, you become a stranger to your own soul. Jung said, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parents." And that burden doesn't just weigh on children, it follows us into adulthood. We end up chasing careers we don't love, living in cities that drain us, dating people who never see us, all because we never learned how to choose for ourselves. Let me tell you about Sarah. She was 28, a graphic designer, lived in a high-rise apartment downtown. From the outside, everything looked perfect. Nice job, nice clothes, nice boyfriend. But inside she was exhausted. Every day she woke up with a pit in her stomach, not because of work deadlines, not because of drama, but because deep down, she knew this life wasn't hers. Her father had always wanted her to have a respectable job. No art, no freelance nonsense, stability. So she went to design school, not because she loved it, but because it was the compromise. She used to write poetry, paint wild, messy canvases. But now her creativity was boxed in, polished, professional, marketable. She didn't remember the last time she created something, just for herself, just for the joy. And her relationship? Same story. He looked good on paper, said all the right things, but she never felt fully seen. She was always editing herself, toning it down, not being too emotional, not being too much. Because somewhere along the way, she learned love meant approval, not authenticity. That's the danger. When you live for others, you lose touch with what you even want, what you even feel. You become excellent at pretending, at performing, at surviving. But you forget how to live. And here's the thing, you don't even realize it at first. Because everyone around you claps. They say, "You're doing so well. You've made it." But you're hollow, smiling with dead eyes, wondering why you feel empty, even when you've done everything right. This is not your fault. You were taught to survive. You were taught to fit in. You were taught that your worth was measured by how useful you were to others, not how honest you were with yourself. But honesty is the only way back. It starts small, with a question. Do I even want this? Who am I doing this for? And if the answer terrifies you, good. That means you're getting closer to the truth. It takes courage to admit you've built a life that isn't yours. But you can't free yourself if you're still lying to yourself. So be honest, brutally, tenderly, completely. Start noticing when you shrink, when you nod but don't agree, when you smile but feel resentful. That's the self betraying itself. And the more you do it, the more numb you become. You might think, but what if they leave me? What if I disappoint them? What if they stop loving me? But let me ask you, what if you stop loving you? What if you abandon yourself for people who only love the mask you wear? That's not love. That's dependency. That's fear. That's conditioning. Real love can survive your truth. It may not always be comfortable, It may not always be easy, but it won't ask you to kill parts of yourself just to keep the peace. So choose discomfort over disconnection. Choose truth over approval. Choose you. Because if you don't, no one else will. And if you wait for someone else to give you permission to be yourself, you'll wait your whole life. You don't need permission. You need rebellion. Not against others, but against the old programming. The one that told you your value is in your performance. The one that told you your voice is only worth hearing if it pleases the crowd. Burn the script, write a new one. Let it be messy. Let it be loud. Let it be real. That's where freedom lives. Not in the applause, not in the achievement, but in the quiet knowing, I am finally living for me. And that, more than anything, is what your inner child has always longed for. You wake up every morning, already feeling behind, not just behind on your to-do list, but behind on becoming the person everyone expects you to be. You scroll through your feed, and the pressure intensifies. One post says, chase your dreams. Another says, be realistic. Your parents told you, security first. Your friends say, do what makes you happy. Your boss wants more output. Your partner wants more presence. And in the middle of all that noise, you begin to lose your own voice. At first, you think you're just tired. You think you just need a break. But rest doesn't bring clarity, because the exhaustion isn't just physical. It's emotional. It's existential. You're not just drained. You're disconnected. Disconnected from your desires, your values, your truth. You were never taught how to ask, what do I really want? Because you were too busy trying to become what others needed you to be. You were the good daughter, the smart one, the reliable one, the strong one, and somewhere in the middle of fulfilling every role, you forgot you were allowed to just be human, a human being, with contradictions, with fears, with changing dreams, with a soft, confused inner voice that got quieter every time you performed someone else's script. Carl Jung once said, the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parents, and that burden doesn't disappear just because we become adults. Sometimes it gets heavier, because now it's not just our parents' unfulfilled dreams, it's our partner's needs, our culture's expectations, our fear of being left behind. You may think this is your life, but parts of it are borrowed. In fact, some parts are inherited, without your consent. The career path that never felt right, but made others proud. The relationship that looks perfect on the outside, but feels hollow when you're alone. The personality traits you've adopted to survive. People-pleasing, hyper-independence, always saying, I'm fine, even when you're falling apart. And all of it slowly takes you away from yourself. You start feeling stuck, but you can't explain why. It's because you're living a life that was never yours to begin with. You're trapped in a version of yourself that was built for approval, not authenticity. Here's the painful truth. Authenticity is not a comfortable process. It's not about adding things to your life. It's about stripping them away. It's about asking, what parts of me are performative? What parts of me are true? It's about grieving the roles you played, so you could finally write your own script. This grief is real, because letting go of expectations feels like letting go of love. We fear rejection. We fear being misunderstood. We fear losing our place in the world if we stop playing the part. But what you'll eventually learn is that belonging doesn't come from performance. It comes from alignment. Alignment with your values, your purpose, your peace. And when you begin to choose alignment over appearance, something shifts. You stop needing to prove yourself. You stop fearing stillness. You stop running from your truth. Let me give you a real example. There's a woman named Claire. She spent 10 years in corporate law. She made good money. Her parents were proud. She was respected. But every day, She woke up with a knot in her stomach. She wasn't depressed, but she wasn't alive either. One day she took a silent retreat. No phone, no external input, just her and her thoughts. For the first time in years, she realized she hadn't made a single decision that was truly hers. She had been climbing a ladder that leaned on someone else's wall. So she stepped away, started a trauma-informed coaching practice. It didn't make sense on paper, but it made her feel whole. She lost some connections, but she gained herself. Her story is not unique. So many of us are living versions of ourselves that exist for the comfort of others. And the longer we do it, the more we forget what it feels like to live in integrity with our inner compass. Your true self doesn't scream. It whispers. It whispers when you lie and feel the sting. It whispers when you say yes, but your body contracts. It whispers in the form of tension, of fatigue, of numbness. That's your signal. Not that you're broken, but that you're misaligned. And realignment requires courage. Not the kind that looks like grand gestures, but the quiet courage to say, this isn't me. Even when you don't yet know who me is. It starts by questioning everything. Your beliefs, your routines, your relationships. Not to throw everything away, but to keep only what's true. Start small. What am I doing out of fear? What am I doing out of love? If no one would be disappointed, what would I choose today? What parts of my life feel like performance? And what parts feel like presence? This is how you return, not by reinventing yourself, but by remembering yourself. You were always there, just buried, under expectations, and the more you peel back those layers, the lighter it becomes. You stop carrying burdens that were never yours to carry, and you finally begin to live, not for applause, not for approval, but for alignment. This is how you stop being who others want you to be. Some people wake up one day and realize they've built a life they don't even like, not because they were lazy, not because they lacked discipline, but because every step was driven by someone else's blueprint. It starts subtly. You get praised for being obedient, for not causing trouble, for doing the right thing, even when that right thing doesn't feel right in your bones. And slowly, you trade your voice for approval. You trade your curiosity for certainty. You trade your truth for belonging. The child in you was once a question, a pure, open, wild question. But if you were constantly given answers before you could even ask, those answers become your prison. That's how identity gets shaped, not from within, but from the outside in. You start becoming who they needed you to be, not who you really are. Think about it. How many of your choices were made from a place of desire? And how many were made because you didn't want to disappoint someone? Did you choose your major? Or did your parents choose it for you? Did you choose your partner? Or did you fall for the one they said was acceptable? Do you dress a certain way because you love it, or because it fits into what's expected of a man, a woman, a successful adult? Sometimes the deepest rebellion is not shouting no, but whispering, this isn't me. But the world doesn't like whispers, it likes certainty. It likes people who know their role and stay in it. That's why changing feels like betrayal. When you start to say no to the things that no longer align, people get uncomfortable, especially the ones who benefited from your silence, especially the ones who saw your obedience as love. There's a story I want to tell you. A woman named Sarah grew up in a household where her mother gave up her dreams to raise children. Every time Sarah showed ambition, her mother would say, don't work too hard. A woman's place is to have balance. Don't be too intense. Don't forget to smile. Sarah internalized this. She began to shrink herself. She got good grades, but avoided leadership roles. She didn't want to be too much. Later in her 20s, she entered a safe relationship. He was kind, stable. Her parents approved, but deep inside, she felt numb. She couldn't explain it, because nothing was wrong, but nothing was alive either. It took her years to realize she was living her mother's unlived life, the part of her mother that never dared to take up space, that settled for approval over authenticity. Sarah wasn't being true, she was being loyal, and sometimes, loyalty becomes your cage. This happens more often than we admit. A son who becomes a doctor because his father failed at medicine. A daughter who stays quiet because her mother was always too loud. A child who becomes the responsible one because the family needs a savior. We inherit more than genetics. We inherit their fears, their regrets, their unfinished stories, and we mistake those stories for our own. But here's the truth. You don't owe anyone the sacrifice of your becoming. You were not born to complete someone else's healing. You were not born to finish a story that isn't yours. The greatest gift you can give your family is not obedience, it's truth. It's living so honestly that it shatters their illusion and maybe inspires their awakening. It will be uncomfortable. They might resist. They might guilt you. They might say, "You've changed," but what they really mean is, you stopped playing the role we gave you. And that's not betrayal. That's liberation. It doesn't mean you don't love them. It means you love yourself too. And that love demands truth. So ask yourself, what parts of you were chosen by others? What dreams are you chasing because someone else couldn't? What parts of your identity feel performative, exhausting, hollow? What do you do just to maintain peace, even if it costs your joy? Who do you become when you're finally alone and no one is watching? That's the real you. That's the voice underneath the noise. That's the life waiting to be lived. And until you start listening, you'll keep chasing a version of success that leaves you feeling empty, because success without self is just performance. No applause will ever feel enough if you're clapping for a character, not a person. So let them be disappointed. Let them be confused. Let them call you selfish, because choosing yourself will always look like rebellion to those who benefit from your self-abandonment. But in the long run, is the only way back to your real life. You were not born to live someone else's dream, but somewhere along the way you started doing exactly that. You began adjusting your voice to make it easier for others to listen. You started picking safe paths, so no one would say you were being too much. You learned to smile when you wanted to scream. You learned to please when you wanted to walk away. Not because you were weak, but because approval felt safer than authenticity. Many of us don't even realize we're carrying the weight of someone else's unlived life. It doesn't always look obvious. It looks like becoming a lawyer because your dad said stability matters. It looks like staying in a relationship because your mom says at least they're not cheating. It looks like choosing a practical degree when your soul was begging for art. It looks like shrinking yourself at family dinners so no one calls you too sensitive. And the longer you live like this, the more you forget who you were before the world told you who you should be. You become a version of yourself that exists to keep peace, not to feel peace. You lose your ability to say no because disappointing others feels unbearable. You become obsessed with doing the right thing, but you can't even define what that means anymore. You scroll past people living bold lives and think, I could never do that. Not because you can't, but because you've been trained to believe that your desires are dangerous, that your truth is a threat to the people you were taught to never upset. Carl Jung once said, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parents." And maybe that's what you're carrying. Not just their hopes, but their regrets, their fear of being seen, their fear of failure, their fear of breaking the mold. So they hand it to you like a map. And they say, follow this. Don't get lost. Don't go too far. But what if getting lost is exactly how you find yourself? What if breaking their pattern is the most loving thing you could do? Because the truth is, you weren't born to fulfill anyone's expectations. You were born to meet your own soul. And that requires letting go of roles you never agreed to play, of masks you were forced to wear, of guilt that was never yours to carry. It's terrifying, because when you stop performing, you risk being rejected. You risk being misunderstood. You risk being alone, for the first time with your real self. But the alternative is far worse. Living your whole life as a stranger to yourself, that's the real tragedy. You don't have to hate your family to outgrow their blueprint. You don't have to burn bridges to stop living on someone else's terms. You just have to ask yourself one question. Is this the life I would have chosen if no one else was watching? And if the answer is no, you're allowed to start again. You're allowed to redefine success. You're allowed to disappoint others, if it means being true to yourself. Because your life is not a debt you owe to other people's expectations. It's a one-time opportunity to become who you really are. And that's worth risking everything for, even their approval.